Hey, I haven't talked about Dark Souls 1's bosses yet, so let's change that today by ranking all of them from worst to best. As usual, the criteria for the ranking will be more or less split into two parts: the actual moveset of the fight, as well as everything else like visuals, music, arena, lore, etc. And of course, there's the obligatory mention that this video is not me trying to objectively rank the bosses in the correct order. It's just about how much enjoyment I personally get out of fighting them. I should also say before going into this that while I am a massive fan of the FromSoft games, I'm also not exactly a blind glazer. I'm willing to admit faults when they're present, and while I think Dark Souls 1 is a fantastic and super immersive game overall, its boss lineup isn't exactly one of the finest in the series. I'm sure it's been fairly obvious until now that I've usually kept boss rankings exclusive to the games that actually have particularly impressive lineups, but I still love this game, and I still have interest in its bosses, especially since there are a handful that actually contend with FromSoft's newer stuff. Now, let's begin. Number 26. Bed of Chaos. You know, it's almost kind of satisfying when you hear people hype something up as being terrible, and it actually fully lives up to just how bad they say it is. The Bed of Chaos is one of the absolute worst bosses I've ever had the displeasure of fighting, but I guess I'll start by mentioning the positives that exist. Since this is one of the Lord bosses, I'd say it does a solid job at having a grand and intimidating presence. Like, having this be the abomination that the Witch of Izalith turned into by trying to recreate the First Flame is decently fitting. And to be fair, the platforming aspect of this boss is passable in a vacuum, but the reason why it can be so frustrating is because of everything else happening at the same time. And easily the biggest offender of the entire encounter is these obnoxious hand swipe attacks. Even after playing this game over and over again, I still don't always have a tight strategy for dealing with these. Their hitboxes are massive and lingering, they can be dished out very consistently, often while you're busy dealing with other dangers such as not falling, and they just create such a perfect balance of not being fun at all to deal with while adding so much unnecessarily over-the-top tension to the fight. Aside from that, you've also got the fiery blades that get added upon the player destroying each of the weak spots. This is the kind of mechanic where if you stay on top of it and make sure to always be moving, it's technically not that bullshit. But of course, it's damn near impossible to keep track of that while you're already busy dealing with the platforming and the terrible hand swipes. Plus, the icing on the cake is the random firestorm spells that you just have to be ready for at all times, I guess. Now, I'm sure there are a few of you out there who played this game once or twice, and you happen to get a bit lucky with this fight, so you managed to beat it on the first or second try without falling or getting swiped to death. Because, yeah, sometimes that happens to me as well. I just have luck on my side and manage to jump through its overly punishing design unscathed. But if even one thing goes wrong along the way, it usually leads to a chain reaction of the other aspects coming to get you as well while you're trying to heal yourself. In general, the idea of a boss focused on platforming isn't a bad decision, but you have to actually make it in a way where the boss's attacks feel reasonable to deal with while platforming, and this is basically the opposite of that. Screw the Bed of Chaos, it's as bad as everyone says it is, and it's the absolute worst, least enjoyable part of one of my favorite games.
You'll find more cheer in a graveyard.
Number 25, Pinwheel. Pinwheel is a foe that you come face to face with at the end of the Catacombs area in the 2011 video game called Dark Souls. Yeah, this guy's existence is basically a joke. If you go to the Catacombs by the time you've made about any progress in leveling up your character, you probably won't struggle much with him since his health bar is smaller than some of the game's regular enemies. As far as the moveset, he has the ability to shoot fireballs at you, he can temporarily disappear, and he can summon clones of himself. That's it. Now, since the Catacombs are available to the player from the moment you beat the tutorial, it is technically possible that some people will actually run into Pinwheel as their first non-tutorial boss in the game. So I guess in that way, his health almost sort of makes sense. But at the same time, I personally consider the combination of the Catacombs and the Tomb of the Giants to be the most difficult stretch of level design in the entire game. So if anything, I'd want them to give him a bigger health bar to help new players realize that they shouldn't be exploring this place until late game. But I guess at the least, it is cool that defeating him grants you the ability to upgrade Estus past 10 drinks, which makes it a fun strategy to beat him early on and have ridiculous healing for the rest of the game. Anyway, I think the fact that I've mostly been talking about the situation around the fight as opposed to the fight itself shows how little there is to discuss here. As for positives, I do think his arena is kinda neat with the endless books on necromancy and the hanging skeletons. Also, for some reason, he's one of the bosses that gets to have a cutscene, and I mean, yeah.
Now, this is epic.
Number 24, Ceaseless Discharge. While Bed of Chaos is a boss so bad that it makes me embarrassed for the game, and Pinwheel is a boss so easy that I think of him as a joke, Ceaseless Discharge is like a less offensive version of both issues. As usual, the one positive I can muster up is his visual design. I mean, I don't love it by any means, but it's hard to deny that the glaring grotesqueness of his open ribcage being filled with whatever that stuff is catches my eye on every playthrough. Aside from that, it's pretty bad. Not as bad as I had experienced while doing this boss on the no rolling, no running challenge, but still offering next to nothing in terms of enjoyment. His attacks all fall under two categories. They're either slow and predictable, often with super long windows for you to damage him afterward, or they have massive hitboxes that feel over the top. Though of course, most people will choose to defeat him by doing the infamous cheese strategy, and considering how little there is to enjoy when fighting him normally, I don't see any reason not to. I guess it's a little interesting how you piss him off at the start by stealing his sister's clothes, but what can I say, Brotato?
Skill issue.
Number 23, Capra Demon. Easily one of the most infamously hated on bosses in the game, and it is for a pretty fair reason. I know it, most of you watching this video probably know it, it's honestly the most noteworthy aspect of the entire encounter. Having two dogs that can sprint toward you the moment you enter the fog gate, while Capra himself isn't too far behind, is one of the most needlessly frustrating design choices in the game. The most interesting thing about this boss to me is always just wondering how those first 10 seconds are gonna go. I've already gone on record multiple times talking about how dog enemies in these games aren't particularly fun to fight, especially in groups, and their addition just makes the experience feel so tense for all the wrong reasons. But luckily, the arena is designed in a way where you can bait them up the stairs and defeat them before the real boss catches up. It just doesn't always work seamlessly. As for the main foe of the fight, he actually is a pretty well designed enemy with a fair moveset. However, for the standards of a boss fight, he doesn't really live up in terms of keeping you on the edge of your seat or having any kind of a memorable, intimidating presence. He really does just feel like an above average regular enemy, which means I can get more enjoyment out of fighting him than the previous foes I've mentioned, but there's also no question in my mind as to whether or not I'll be able to beat him once the tedious intro is out of the way. Number 22, Centipede Demon. I go a little back and forth with how I feel about this one. There's a part of me that thinks of this boss as an utter embarrassment that actively makes the game worse, but at the same time, like, it's kinda just whatever. While the majority of the ground being coated in lava is a bit tedious, I do like how you can cut off the demon's tail to get the lava ring mid-fight, making it easier on yourself. Plus, getting the ring after defeating it normally is still a somewhat cool and satisfying moment that answers the question of how you progress from here. When looking at the moveset, it's partially passable and partially bad. That attack where he does a flip followed by a hand slam is totally fine, and dare I say is kinda fun to dodge. This sweeping one is also okay, but other than that, it's just some basic swings, a boring one where he jumps in the air, a grab attack where he throws you into his body part, and the obnoxious arm extension attack, which he will spam relentlessly if you're outside of his range, which can especially make the beginning of the fight really tedious. As for visual design, this one's not getting any praise from me.
You should be dead.
The way this boss looks just screams rushed development to me more than any other. So overall, I used to hate this one more than I do now, but regardless, I'd still have a rough time trying to argue that it belongs any higher. Number 21, Gravelord Nito. Another boss that I used to despise, but I now think is just moderately bad. Honestly though, he's got a solid handful of positives. His design is really cool, of course, and I think they did a good job of translating it from the epic prologue to the actual gameplay. Plus it looks cool when his cloak comes off after defeating him. The whole vibe of the encounter just feels exactly how it should. From the arena, to the music, to the fact that he unfortunately has skeleton enemies on his side, which I don't enjoy from a gameplay perspective. But at the same time, if there's one boss who's gonna have enemies on his side, I guess this is about as fitting as that type of mechanic could be. I'm also a huge sucker for when boss fights make good use of audio cues, which happens here since you can always hear that distant scream sound effect about a second before Nito makes the red blade pop up. But almost everything else about the fight isn't ideal. Like I said, the skeletons aren't fun from a gameplay perspective. To be fair, you can stop them from respawning if you use a divine weapon, so I feel like I really can't hate on this aspect too much. But still, most players won't know about that, and it's just not enjoyable to deal with. Also, having giant skeletons in here at all was just a dick move. If you don't use a divine weapon, then the best way to deal with the enemies is by staying close to Nito, hoping that he'll continuously spam this giant spell that insta-kills them, which luckily you can tank through. As for the rest of Nito's moveset, it's fine. Just some standard passable enough melee attacks with really long windows for you to hit him, as well as one cool grab. It's almost like they didn't have enough time to make Nito threatening on his own, so they just added the skeletons to the encounter to make it feel more properly challenging. So Nito definitely isn't terrible, but he also doesn't live up to the hype that a Lord boss should have. Number 20, Moonlight Butterfly. This was without a doubt one of the hardest bosses to place on the list. In terms of visuals and atmosphere, I low-key love it. The look and the ambient noises of Darkroot Garden are so damn whimsical and relaxing. Combining that with the elegant design of the butterfly, as well as its visually pleasing magic projectiles, and the really unique, calming soundtrack creates a vibe that I genuinely get a lot out of. I also don't have a problem with most of the butterfly's attacks. The triple shot, the sky bomb, and the big laser are totally fine, and the laser is even kinda fun to dodge. Though the one attack I don't like is the most common one where it shoots 2 magic shotgun blasts. It just comes out so abruptly, and I pretty much always tank these with a shield for convenience. Now, the elephant in the room in terms of flaws is that if you're playing with a pure melee build, then you better enjoy waiting, because that's what you'll be doing for the majority of the encounter. You have to sit around for anywhere between 40 seconds and however long for it to give you an attack window. Also, if you're fighting it in the early game, which I think is what was intended, it takes a good few landing sequences for you to actually defeat it. Of course, this boss is naturally way less of a hassle if you're playing with a viable ranged option, but in reality, that's a pretty small percentage of players. It's hard to say how I feel about this boss as a whole. From what I've heard, it seems that other people tend to dislike it a little more than I do. And while I definitely can't argue that the gameplay is worthy of much praise, the visuals and atmosphere do carry it really hard to the point that I slightly enjoy it from time to time. Number 19, Taurus Demon. Out of all the bosses that are low on the list, this is the main one that I really wish I could like more than I do. Because similarly to some other low fights, I think it's a solid encounter, until you factor in the actual gameplay. But starting with the positives, I think he's got a cool design, along with the memorable entrance where he jumps off the tower and roars. And it's neat how you can remember your training from the tutorial boss by climbing the ladder and utilizing a plunge attack on him. I also enjoy the tension of hearing him run towards you while you're trying to climb the ladder in time. Plus, it's a funny detail that he can jump up if you take too long. There's also the fact that you can cheese this guy by making him fall off the side, which does feel good when it happens. In so many ways, I feel like this is a perfectly fitting encounter as the game's first real boss after the tutorial. However, we now unfortunately need to discuss the Taurus Demon's moveset, which would be totally passable and the right amount of challenge for this point in the game, if it weren't for the giant gaping flaw that is lingering hitboxes. Yeah, it's really bad. Luckily, there are a few attacks that don't have this problem, which are the ones where he uses horizontal swings. But every single move that ends with his weapon on the ground is just inexcusable. The fact that you can still take damage just from standing nearby it for the second after it touches the floor is so needlessly punishing, especially since you're in a tight arena, and it more or less completely negates the baseline of how you fight most Souls bosses, which is dodging through their attack while relying on your iframes to keep you safe. And the fact that lots of players will likely be using medium equip load this early in the game only exacerbates the issue. Luckily though, there is still a foolproof way of defeating him without much danger, that being a straight up hit and run strategy. As long as you've got decent running speed and a weapon that doesn't take years to swing, you can pretty safely hit him, run away while dodging the current attack, and run back in to hit him again. It's not particularly fun or engaging, but if you're actually just trying to beat him with zero bullshit, this is the way to do it. So all in all, I think Taurus Demon would be a solid fight if he didn't have his lingering hitboxes. But because he has them, it's an encounter with some likable aspects that ultimately leaves a bit of a sour taste in my mouth, especially back in my first playthrough. Number 18, Seath the Scaleless. There was a point where I had Seath a bit higher on the list, but the more time has gone on and the more I've thought about it, I've accepted that this fight is honestly really lame. I want to like it because he looks cool, the arena is visually pleasing, and he's one of the Lord bosses who had so much aura in the game's intro cutscene. But in terms of boss design, there's not much to it. His moveset consists of 3 Crystal Breath attacks, which are easy to avoid as long as you're paying attention to him, 1 move where he punches you, and 1 move where he flails around if you get behind him. That's everything Seath the Scaleless is capable of doing. Also, since his attacks aren't particularly fast, you've got some meaty time windows to wail on him. And because Seath doesn't have some kind of compensation for his lack of move complexity like Nito with the skeleton enemies, he's likely going to be a pushover for the majority of players. Throughout my years of replaying these games, I can safely say that Seath is one of the bosses I've died the least to in any FromSoft game. I suppose he does try to compensate by having a curse effect on the crystal attacks, which can potentially be a pain. But like I said earlier, I don't think the crystals are challenging to avoid as long as you're just paying attention. Plus, the clams outside his arena drop purging stones for you. As far as random miscellaneous stuff, I can't help but find the existence of his immortality crystal to be funny. Because on one hand, it's nice to see that there's an explanation for why we can kill him, and it's neat to see that he takes no damage before you break it. But also, destroying it takes a single swing, and now he's unceremoniously back to being mortal. Bruh. Number 17, Crossbreed Priscilla. Priscilla is a really cool concept for a boss, and if she got some more attention and development, I could see her being pretty damn good. But as is, she's just okay. The gimmick of her turning invisible and then having to find her by watching for footprints in the snow is a fun little moment. But once you do find her, you'll quickly realize that she's one of the easiest battles in the game. She's got some standard scythe swings, and she can use her frost breath from being half dragon, which is cool. But that's all there is to it. Another thing I like though is how different her encounter feels from the rest of the game. After walking into the arena, she asks that you just leave her alone and dip off the plank back to your world, which you actually can do. But if you decide that you don't care enough about her life to the point that you'd rather take her souls, the battle begins. Her backstory about being considered an abomination as a crossbreed of dragons and humans is also really interesting. Plus, I think it's hilarious how FromSoft knew people would be simping for her, so she has a line where she straight up rejects the player.
If thou seekest I, thine desires shall be requited not.
Number 16 and 15, Stray Demon and Demon Fire Sage. These two bosses are tied because their movesets are almost exactly the same, and the aspects of them that are different, which I'll get to, aren't significant enough for me to put them at different spots on the list. As for the moveset itself, while it's nothing super commendable, I would say it keeps me more positively engaged than anything we've covered thus far. They've got a few passable melee swings, the classic strategy of flying up and butt slamming, and a couple magic AoEs. The only differences between the two are that the Fire Sage gets one additional melee move, and his explosion AoEs are larger. The melee stuff is, as I said, passable, and the magic AoE that comes from them sticking their staves in the ground is a solid move. But the one where they use the catalyst to summon an explosion out in front of them is by far the aspect of this fight that has me feeling the most conflicted. On one hand, it's arguably the most dynamic part of the entire encounter since it forces you to consider positioning. Because the radius is hard to escape, you need to always be wary of it and either be ready to instantly sprint behind them, or stay far enough away that you can outrun it. But at the same time, for how quickly this attack comes out, I think it's just a little too punishing. Especially with the Fire Sage since his explosions are even bigger. Oh well, I can't tell if I consider it to be a bad thing, but I can live with it. As for the other aspects that make them unique, I actually find the sort of mini arc you have with the Stray Demon to be satisfying. When you first start the game, walking through the Asylum Hall, you can look through the bars to your right and see this giant demon pacing around a room, giving you the impression that you may have to fight against this creature, but instead you end up fighting his weaker brother in order to escape the tutorial. Then later when you come back to the asylum, you end up falling through the floor of the initial fight, which takes you down to the demon that you could see from the start, and after defeating him, you walk right back into the hallway where you spotted him at the beginning. I know there's nothing too complex about it, but I just think it's cool. And for the Demon Fire Sage, there's nothing too special about him aside from a little bit of lore, but his design is definitely cooler since his whole body is perpetually on fire. Not much else to say about these two. I don't think they're the worst example of reskins in these games, but obviously nowhere near the best. Number 14, Asylum Demon, and right above them I have the original boss that they're reskins of. Naturally, this guy has less going for him in terms of gameplay, but I also think he definitely gets bonus points for being a well-executed tutorial boss. In general, tutorial bosses play with slightly different rules for me when it comes to ranking them. They're supposed to not be too challenging compared to the rest of the game because they're your first major introduction to the combat, and I do enjoy the unique scenario of this tutorial fight compared to other ones. When you first walk in the room, you're not supposed to be able to win. All you have to fight with is Guts' broken sword hilt, which does almost no damage. So the rational choice here is to dip through the side door and find some better equipment before fighting him again. Though I do appreciate that you can technically beat him to death with the sword hilt if you're committed enough. After getting your starter weapons, and possibly making a promise to a dying crestfallen knight, you get to re-enter the arena with a free plunging attack, which I'm sure was a fairly hype moment for a lot of newcomers after having their backs against the wall initially. From here, he shouldn't be much of a hassle, and once you're done with him, you're granted access to travel to the land of the ancient lords. I'd also say he has a solid design for the game's first boss. It's like Cleric Beast in Bloodborne, where it pales in comparison to the horrors you'll witness later, but looks fairly intimidating when you're still new to things. And of course, he comes with his very iconic giant cheeks.
Extra thick!
Number 13, Dark Sun Gwendolyn. While this is arguably the simplest boss in the entire game aside from Pinwheel, I think it actually makes for a well-executed gimmick fight. First of all, the whole build-up and context leading to this encounter makes it really stand out compared to everything else. After going out of your way to commit a felony against Anne Orlando, you turn the whole place dark, making it drop its illusion of everlasting grandeur compared to the rest of the world. Also, you happen to get threatened by a son of Gwyn who knows sorcery, and has the ability to teleport away once you've gotten too close to him. While the boss's number of moves is very limited, I think the way the fight is set up makes it engaging for what it is. The bow and arrow attack is definitely the easiest, since you can either outrun it, dodge it, or avoid it by hiding behind a pillar. The barrage of sorceries is a bit trickier since you can sort of consistently dodge it, but the way each projectile comes at you from a different angle makes it a little more dynamic than the other attacks, which means that the safest option is to avoid them entirely by using a pillar. And the third attack, the big sorcery, goes through pillars, which means that they aren't a perfectly safe fallback. Luckily though, this one is pretty easy to dodge as long as you're paying attention. While Gwendolyn naturally doesn't reach the same highs as some of the more respectable bosses due to its limited scope, I still think it feels like an enjoyable change of pace that definitely could have turned out to be a lot worse. I also think it's got a cool vibe, with the seemingly never-ending hallway, the context of having gotten the attention of one of the children of the Lord of Cinder, the atmospheric dark lighting, and the standout soundtrack, which is admittedly a reuse from Moonlight Butterfly, but I think it works really well here. In all honesty, this might be one of the better sorcerer bosses in the series. Number 12, Gaping Dragon. So obviously, my favorite things about this boss are its design and its soundtrack. Both are pretty cool in my opinion and feel like iconic staples of this game. While the moveset is far from the best that Dark Souls has to offer, I also don't find it to be particularly annoying. Honestly, the most standout flaw of this boss to me is just how easy it is. It can be a little rough on your first playthrough since there are a few screwy hitboxes you need to be aware of, and a couple big damaging attacks which could potentially be a problem if you're unfamiliar with them. But this is definitely one of the main bosses where once you do know how to fight it, it's really just a minor speed bump in the journey. The main culprit of the ease is how long it waits in between attacks. I feel like FromSoft realized that allowing a giant, unconventionally structured foe like this to move too fast could potentially make it an unfun nightmare to fight. So they erred on the side of caution by making it slow. But maybe it turned out just slightly undertuned, because I always feel like I have enough time and then some to completely outspace most of the attacks. As far as the actual moveset, I think most of it is pretty okay. There's a few attacks where it messes around with swapping between its two body positions, which feels like a nice way of getting the most out of its unique design. It can slam the top half of itself down to the ground, giving you an opportunity to whack at its goofy little head for some extra damage, which usually gets followed up by it using a charge attack. This attack admittedly has some hitboxes that feel over the top, but 95% of the time, as long as you're aware that these hitboxes exist, I think they're pretty easy to avoid, since the move in general is easy to avoid. There are also a few standard melee attacks from the front, such as the triple slam, the tail swiping moves, which you can make obsolete by cutting off the tail, an attack where it jumps in the air to reposition itself, a grab where it proceeds to eat you, and an acid puke one, which I'm not a particular fan of. Overall, while there's nothing super standout about the moveset, I think it's got just enough variety and memorability to make for a decently enjoyable encounter when combined with the standout design and soundtrack. How do you judge a boss fight that's perfect in every single way except for the actual gameplay? Gwyn, Lord of Cinder, is one of the coolest set pieces I've witnessed in any video game. He has the best build up to a boss fight I've ever seen. After venturing to every corner of Lordran in search of the old lords, you return to where your journey began, use the lord souls you've collected to be granted access to the kiln of the first flame in one of my favorite cutscenes in any of these games, watch the ethereal knights walk through this white void with angelic music in the background, which is one of my favorite moments in any video game. Witness the kiln, fight some of the best enemies in the game, get a glimpse of the ancient being who's been ruler of this world for who knows how long, and once you finally enter the fog gate, you see that just like everything else in this world, he's an old, lesser version of the incredibly powerful lord that he once was. But despite this, he's still a force to be reckoned with, who also looks pretty badass in the process. Even his death animation is so cool. Plus, he's got one of the most iconic and unforgettable tracks in any Souls game. To this day, this fight remains as one of the most perfect spectacles to ever come out of From Software, which is why it's a shame that the gameplay is a bit flawed. I personally wouldn't quite argue that it's bad overall, since I think it still sorta works for what it is, but if I'm being 100% honest with myself, I can't say that he's a fair and balanced boss. By far, the biggest issue with him is this super fast combo starting swing. Even after learning how to consistently avoid some pretty insane shit that the bosses in these games can do, this move just feels to me like it asks a little too much of the player in terms of reaction time. Though I do think you can try to muster up some alternative strategies for this issue. You've probably noticed in the footage so far that I typically don't lock onto bosses when fighting them in this game, due to the 4-directional rolling. But with Gwyn, I find that locking onto him actually really helps for focusing on dodging this attack, since it allows your brain to have one less thing to worry about. And as long as you try to keep an instinct to edge his attack range while typically rolling backwards instead of forward, you can kinda make it so that you always dodge the start of his combos, whether or not it's the one that comes out too fast. But I still don't think being forced into such a specific mindset, all for the sake of avoiding one single janky swing, makes for a well-balanced experience. Aside from that though, I like the rest of his moves. The opening attack with the giant leap is always super satisfying to dodge. He's got a few different combos with alternating follow-ups to keep you on your toes. And of course, there's the iconic grab attack. The big thrust that he uses to stop you from healing is maybe a little too aggressive, but not that bad. Of course, another elephant in the room I haven't addressed is that you can make this fight a joke if you know how to parry. And while most players will probably have a small period of struggle when first learning to parry, I personally think that this is the easiest game for parrying in the entire series. So if you just take maybe 30 minutes or so to practice it, then you've got a foolproof strategy to make the game's final boss look absolutely helpless. I know this might technically count as a negative for some, but since I think his gameplay can be slightly too obnoxious for the average player to put up with, I find that it's kinda nice how there's a consistent way to beat him. Realistically, there isn't any spot on this list that I think feels appropriate for Gwyn. His cool factor is so astronomical and gives off such easy S-tier energy that it makes his flawed gameplay really sting, since just a little more time playtesting could have turned him into an overall amazing boss fight that feels like a worthy conclusion to the game in every way. But as is, I think he's an outstanding set piece that delivers on story and vibes fantastically, while being an uneven experience of actual gameplay. Number 10, Iron Golem. While this guy obviously doesn't reach the same highs as Gwyn, he's the first boss on the list that I can say makes for a solid fight with no strings attached. It's definitely not flawless, but I actually take the encounter with him completely seriously. To start, he's got a cool design, a cool arena, and a somewhat memorable soundtrack that fits the encounter pretty well. He also has a standout move where he uses the axe to shoot a projectile at you. But my favorite aspect of this fight is definitely the fact that you and the Golem have the ability to knock each other off of the arena. arena. He has a move where he catches you from underneath his legs, which feels specifically made to yeet the player off the side. But of course, if you hit him consistently enough to the point that he gets staggered, as long as you follow up by hitting him while he's in his staggered state, then you'll be able to knock him backwards, falling to the ground. Or if you go out of your way to get him in the right spot, then you can get him to fall off the side, which never ceases to feel awesome when it happens. So undoubtedly, this whole battle of both sides trying to end the fight in an instant by utilizing Dark Souls' most powerful weapon, gravity, is the best part of the Iron Golem in my opinion. When it comes to the overall moveset, it's not bad, but it's still just really not that impressive. The axe projectile and the grab attack are both positive aspects like I said, and none of his other moves are bad by any means. But it kind of feels similar to Gaping Dragon, where you can pretty easily see the attacks coming, making it not the most intense of battles. Also, it feels kinda lame how long he stands around after you stagger him. I like the mechanic overall, but maybe they could have just had this last a little less time. So all in all, I like Iron Golem for being a cool fight with a fun gravity related gimmick. And while the moveset isn't great, it's solid enough to hold the encounter together. Number 9, Bell Gargoyles. I really respect these guys for being the first legit, well-constructed boss that the player comes across. Asylum Demon could barely be called a challenge, and Taurus Demon's middle name is Shitbox, so it always feels kinda nice once you get to this point in the game. The first phase where you only fight one gargoyle is a solid warm-up. Individually, these guys more or less just feel like well above average enemies with a lot of health, and I think it was a nice idea to give the player a chance to figure out the gargoyle moveset before having to deal with two at the same time. As for the moveset itself, like I said, it feels reminiscent of being a particularly complex regular enemy type, but for what it's worth, I think it's pretty well paced and engaging. There's a few different swings with the halberd, they can fly, and the first one has an axe embedded in its tail that it can hit you with. Then once the first gargoyle is at half health, the second one drops in, also being at half health. And from here, they both have the ability to breathe fire. Now, over the last few years, duo fights in the FromSoft games have been a very heated topic, particularly in Elden Ring's case where they got pretty lazy with a lot of the random mini-bosses, just throwing multiple opponents in the same room regardless of whether or not their moves synergize in a way that's fair to deal with. And all in all, I think this is a pretty well handled duo boss. Because they both gain the ability to breathe fire, which forces them to stay in the same spot, and the second gargoyle very consistently uses the fire attacks, it leads the player to likely find most of their damage opportunities by outspacing the one currently using fire while baiting the closer one to use melee attacks. They also have the ability to fly around with the fire breath, which is definitely when things get the most intense, meaning you've got to stay on top of it. Sometimes it can be a little hectic if they're both using melee attacks at the same time, but I find that the arena is spacious enough that you can usually manage with some good positioning. And aside from the solid gameplay, I think it's a pretty cool little battle, especially on your first playthrough. I like the way the gargoyles look, the setting of being on the roof of the church is memorable, and I really like their soundtrack. It doesn't reach the same epic highs as a lot of the more grand music in these games, but it has such a seamless blend of sounding perilous while also sort of having a bit of medieval fantasy whimsy in the mix. At number 8, we have by far my favorite out of the Lord Soul bosses, the Four Kings. Easily the best part of the encounter is the arena and atmosphere. While I do think it's kinda bullshit that you're guaranteed to die if you walk through the fog gate without the Abyss Ring or a Homeward Bone, I still find it interesting figuring out how you get here, and it leads to one of the most memorable moments in the entire game. Which of course segues into talking about the arena. While you could technically argue that it's as simple as an arena can possibly be, just pitch darkness, it does create a really unique and unsettling vibe that helps the boss to stand out more than it would otherwise. Plus, the odd way they'll come zooming toward you if you're far away from them is so weirdly intimidating. As for the moveset, they've got a pretty solid one. Some good melee attacks that range from horizontal, to vertical, to diagonal, to thrusting, as well as a few standout purple spells. The big AoE gives you a decent amount of time to react, and it looks really cool, especially with the dark arena as the backdrop. There's also this one where they shoot a barrage of projectiles, which is pretty good, though I'm personally not a huge fan of the other two. This infamous homing missile is kind of a cool idea. I guess. But dealing with an attack that goes after you for such a long period while you're potentially dealing with multiple opponents at the same time is a needless hassle if you ask me. It's like a less annoying version of the shitty Elden Stars attack. There's also this grab attack, which I think is just a little too fast. Maybe there is a way to consistently avoid it even from point blank range, but in my experience, this feels like one of those moves where if you happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, there's nothing you can do except to wait out the long animation. So overall, the moveset is pretty good despite a few hiccups. But the last major aspect we need to discuss is the way the kings slowly start to fill up the arena. If you're able to kill each king fast enough that it's dead before the next one shows up, then this is no problem. But naturally, if you take too long, then you could end up in a situation where you're fighting multiple at once. Luckily, they do kinda tend to stay passive if they can see that you're in the middle of dealing with another one, but they'll also just decide at random to come zooming toward you and take a few swings, which is especially annoying since their zooming doesn't have an audio cue, meaning they can very easily sneak up behind you. Realistically, it isn't too hard to make yourself powerful enough that you can defeat the current king before the next one spawns, especially on a fresh save. But even then, I'm someone who really likes being able to take as long as I need to defeat a boss properly by being patient and dodging. But with the 4 kings, you are kinda forced into a rushing mindset. However, aside from that part not being my favorite, and a couple annoying moves, I usually find myself enjoying my battles against these guys. Also, I was gonna say something about the lore, but I forgot. At number 7, I have one of the most iconic foes of the Dark Souls trilogy, Great Grey Wolf Sith. Many aspects of this boss are heavily ingrained into the fandom of these games. First and foremost, lots of us are big fans of dogs, man's best friend and all that. And anytime you see a popular post on social media of someone's dog holding a toy sword in its mouth or whatever, it's pretty much a guarantee that you'll see people mentioning or comparing it to Sif in the comments. Sif also gets one of the most well-known soundtracks in any FromSoft game. And I have to admit, I'm also a big fan of it. I love a lot of these more subtle tracks in Dark Souls 1, even if I do generally prefer the more epic stuff they consistently use these days. On another note, there's obviously the well-known tragic backstory surrounding Sif. Being the sidekick of the once great knight Artorias, after seeing him fall to the corruption of the Abyss, Sif decided to be the guardian of the Abyss Ring so that no one else would have to traverse it. Plus, if you take a trip to the DLC beforehand, you actually get the opportunity to save Sif, which allows you to see an alternate version of the fight's opening cutscene, where you're remembered for the good deed you did, but unfortunately, you still stand in the way of this dog's resolve. As for the gameplay, it is undoubtedly one of the most solid foes in the main game. Sif has the ability to be very mobile when desired, hopping around the place, doing backward twist jumps, or sometimes sprinting in to get a hit on you. This mobility is nice since it allows the fight to have a consistent pace that doesn't let up. And it negates the issue of it being too easy to just stand underneath the legs and get free hits in. I also don't have any problems with the moveset. Sif exclusively uses melee attacks with the sword, and there's a decent amount of variety. There's the triple combo ending with a slam, the sprinting forward one ending with a slice, the classic double spin, and a few others that work well enough. One aspect that makes me a little upset though, despite appreciating it for the sake of detail, is the way Sif limply walks and attacks when the health bar is almost depleted, just trying to make us feel even worse about killing a cute dog. Number 6, Chaos Witch Quelaag. While Quelaag doesn't have the same music quality or mobility as Sif, I think the way her fight is set up works surprisingly well. The spider body isn't particularly fast, and it tends to stick around in the same spot for a decent amount of time unless you try to run somewhere else. However, this aspect being seemingly not too demanding is heavily counteracted by her ability to spew lava on the ground. If you don't stay on top of it and only focus on the boss, you could find yourself in a pretty tight situation trying to weave through the lava pools. And the arena is plenty big enough to the point that I don't think this gimmick ever feels unnecessary or over the top. It just adds a nice extra layer of positioning that you need to stay on top of, which helps to keep me on my toes. And this mechanic works pretty well alongside the rest of her moveset. Sometimes you are able to get pretty big windows for dealing damage while she's busy with the lava spewing, but I'd say this is decently counteracted by the fact that her health bar is big for this point in the game, and she has her AoE explosion to keep you away, which is only telegraphed with a subtle animation where Quelaag reaches down and grabs the spider body, meaning you need to keep an eye out for what she's doing. Aside from that, the spider has a couple other moves like slamming its front limbs to the ground, shooting a quick little lava projectile to the side, or an actual pretty demanding move where it jumps forward while simultaneously shooting a shotgun blast of lava. And of course, the most enjoyable part is when Quelaag uses her sword moves. Unfortunately, all she has is one triple combo and a single thrust attack. But man, that triple combo is easily one of the most enjoyable things to dodge in the game. Aside from the gameplay, I also like a few other things about it. The design is inherently odd, but overall I think it's pretty good. And the environmental storytelling that takes place afterward with her sister is pretty well done. Overall, Quelaag is a boss that doesn't seem particularly amazing on paper with her somewhat limited moveset, but I think what she does have is used to great effect, especially with the addition of the lava gimmick, which leads to her being a foe that I pretty consistently enjoy fighting. Also, Anyway, number 5, Sanctuary Guardian. I feel I should preface real quick that the difference between the top 5 and the rest of this list is pretty damn big. I do get my fair share of entertainment from many of the 21 bosses I just went over, but from here on, we'll be discussing fights that I thoroughly enjoy on every playthrough, and actually compare to some of the best bosses in FromSoft's newer games. Also, yeah, all 4 of the game's DLC bosses were able to make it into my top 5. If you ask me, this DLC is where they finally started to consistently make bosses that have an impressive combination of moveset variety and pacing. So with that said, I obviously really enjoy fighting the Sanctuary Guardian. This thing is one of, if not the most aggressive foe in the entire game. Even compared to some others which I consider to be harder bosses overall, the pace of the Guardian's attacks are relentless. And the fact that it's always doing something really emphasizes the contrast with all the main game bosses. It can charge at you with its horns, try to get you up close with a 2 to 4 hit combo, shoot lightning blasts of varying speeds and sizes, create a gust of wind with its wings, fly around and shoot at you at the same time, or whip around its poisonous tail in hopes of infecting you. All in all, this makes for a dynamic array of attacks to work with. Plus, while players using slow weapons likely won't be able to get hits in very frequently due to how much it runs and flies around the place, I'd say this is offset pretty well by the fact that it has a small health bar. Also, of course, its design is cool, and the arena is a nice little setting that kicks off the vibe of the first half of the DLC really well. So yeah, definitely not one of the most well-known or iconic bosses of the game, but I think it's by far one of the most enjoyable. And of course, the one main game boss that I think stands toe-to-toe with the DLC boss quality is Ornstein and Smo. Before getting to the fight itself, it would be hard not to mention just how awesome the whole vibe of the encounter is. This battle is basically the culmination of everything in the first half of the game. After ringing the bells of awakening and finally making it to this magnificent golden city, your last obstacle in the way of the Lord Vessel, which kicks off the second half of the game, turns out to be Deputy Durlin and Sheriff Blubbs dripped out in some insane golden armor. They get a brief cool cutscene, and they get to have my personal favorite boss soundtrack in the game. Especially on your first playthrough, there's just something undeniably special about how this whole battle feels. But even on repeat playthroughs, the combination of the beautiful setting, cool designs, and epic music usually manages to give me chills at some point. As for the gameplay, the first phase of this fight is more or less the textbook definition of how to make a good duo boss. One of them is a smaller target that attacks you more consistently, and the other is a behemoth who attacks a lot slower, but is also way more punishing when he catches you. The difference in how their movesets are paced isn't even like the most meticulously thought out, but 95% of the time I'd say it works in a way where as long as you put at least some thought into positioning, you can usually bait attacks to a point that keeps them from overlapping and trying to kill you at the exact same time. Of course, the other reason it works so well is because you've got a total of 6 pillars you can utilize to split them apart. So even if they are trying to attack at the same time, you can maneuver around them to make it so they're blocked off from you. And all in all, I really enjoy the balancing act of trying to split them up and focus on damaging one in order to reach that second phase. Speaking of that second phase, it comes with 2 different versions based on which of the duo you defeated in phase 1. If it was Ornstein, then Smo infuses himself with his lightning, adding that effect on top of his attacks. But if you defeat Smo first, then Ornstein is somehow able to use his body to make himself grow. Fighting Smo for phase 2 is definitely easier, and not super special if you ask me, since it's just him in phase 1, but now with lightning added on top. However, I think Super Ornstein is actually pretty damn damn cool. Him turning into a giant significantly changes the way you approach him, and I think it's a fun little battle. I haven't gone in depth with their individual movesets, but I honestly don't really feel the need to. On their own, they're both just pretty well designed foes with somewhat limited attack variety, but the fact that you deal with both at the same time makes the slight lack of variety easily forgiven. The only big blemish for me is, of course, Ornstein's shitty broken charge attack. Sometimes it's fine, but if he gets stuck on anything along the way, he'll completely drop the animation as if he's done with it, and then spontaneously go right back into it, which can feel kinda bullshit. Aside from that, I think Ornstein and Smo deserves its title as one of the best and most iconic boss fights of the Dark Souls trilogy. Obviously, I think there are better ones, but to this day, I think the well thought out nature of this duo, along with their memorable cool factor, makes for an awesome fight. Number 3, Black Dragon Kalameet, the first time FromSoft managed to produce a legit, well-made dragon boss. Throughout Demon Souls and the main game of Dark Souls 1, you can tell the developers really liked dragons, and that they wanted to implement these creatures into their games in any way they could. But Kalameet is the first instance where they actually pulled off having a dragon that comes with a well-made moveset. And even after the handful of games they've done since DS1, I think Kalameet still undoubtedly stands as one of the most fun to fight. First of all, the cool factor here is top notch. Your initial introduction to him on the Royal Wood Bridge is a really memorable moment, and after that you get attacked by him while not being able to do anything about it since he just flies out of your range. Then after talking to one of my favorite characters in the game, you get to witness him snipe Kalameet out of the air, finally leading to the real battle. And Kalameet himself is so damn cool. His single glowing red eye stands out from his dark body, and his yellow flames that have black on the inside are just so good. Now for the gameplay. And holy shit, this guy is absolutely oozing with move variety. He can try to stab you with his pointy head, do a stylish tail whip twist, shoot fire breath at you in varying patterns, do a quick dash forward followed by turning around and breathing fire, stomp around a bit, fly in the air and attempt to ram you, fly in the air and shoot down a massive wave of fire, catch you in his calamity beam to make you take double damage, the list goes on. He's also what I would personally consider to be the hardest boss in the game, which is ironic since he's actually one of the few bosses I beat first try back in my initial playthrough. But the combination of his wide array of demanding attacks along with being super mobile and having large hitboxes makes for a foe that I always have to take seriously. That said, I obviously think it's super fun as well. The consistent pacing and hard to predict moveset do wonders for keeping the player engaged, and I think almost everything he has is fun to dodge, with the exception of those pesky head pokes. The most common criticism I've heard for Kalameet is that some people think his hitboxes can be a little over the top, and personally, the only time I agree with this complaint is when he uses these stupid head pokes. They're mostly okay, but the hitboxes linger for too long, and it can be pretty annoying when they physically push you around. If it weren't for this issue, then I actually would have had the controversial take of putting Kalameet even higher, but with that minor problem in mind, I think he's still deserving of the top 3. Number 2, Knight Artorias. Definitely the most common choice for the best boss in the game, and it's very easy to see why. First, you've got the fact that he's one of the most beloved characters in the series. Throughout your journey in Lordran, you can hear a few different people talk about the legend of Artorias, the brave knight who traversed and fought against the corruption of the Abyss, alongside his loyal husky. And supposedly he defeated Manus, the father of the Abyss, who corrupted the land of Ulasil in hopes of finding his precious pendant. But when we travel back in time to the DLC, we see that Artorias actually never completed his mission and fell to the Abyss. So now we're here to give him an honorable death before taking our turn at fighting the Father of the Abyss. But of course, all the backstory and build-up wouldn't be able to squeak him out of the lower end of the list if his gameplay wasn't good. And obviously, he's one of the most fun bosses in the game. A lot of the reasoning for why it's fun is similar to what I've been saying about the other DLC bosses. There's a noticeable upgrade in moveset variety and pacing, but it also feels significantly different from the previous ones I've mentioned. He doesn't really waste any time moving around or trying to reposition himself since he doesn't have any long-range projectile attacks. Unless he's going out of his way to buff himself, then he's basically always charging directly toward the player, and being able to consistently dodge his unorthodox attacks feels so damn good. Speaking of those attacks, he has his most iconic one where he flips followed by a slam, which you can do between 1 and 3 times in a row, and I love how that randomized aspect of it forces you to stay on your toes and be prepared for whichever number it ends up being. He can also take a giant leap and land with with an abyss-soaked AoE. He can do this one where he spins while swinging and backflipping. He's got a big dangerous thrust. And even his simpler moves just feel so clean and satisfying to dodge. In terms of visuals and music, I'm also a big fan. He doesn't have any super flashy magic-based attacks or anything, but I think the combination of his standout armor set along with the overgrown, atmospheric, literal arena makes for an awesome vibe. The music isn't one of the more hype tracks, but of course it isn't supposed to be anyway, and I think it fits really well. I also appreciate how this is one of the main bosses where I can enjoy it whether or not I lock on. Either way, I think it works. So yeah, while I'm personally not the biggest Artorias fanboy in the world, I still really appreciate everything he has going for him. And luckily, I don't think it's a case where people just blindly glaze him because his backstory is cool. In terms of fun factor, he's head and shoulders above almost every other Dark Souls 1 boss, and getting to him is always one of the biggest highlights when I replay this game. But of course, there's one more that I prefer. Number 1, Manus, Father of the Abyss. Yeah, Manus is just too good. While I do prefer some aspects of the other bosses like Ornstein and Smo's music or Artorias' arena, I think Manus is the most well-rounded and has the best overall gameplay. Now, to be fair, the only move that I think might be just a hair too punishing is his big combo where he juggles you in the air. But even then, you're still able to dodge the first swing of it, which often gives you enough time to run out of its range before it's over. And aside from that, this guy feels to me like the peak of what Dark Souls 1's combat has to offer. I know that I've started to use this word a little too much throughout the video, so I apologize for that. But the main thing that really sells it for me is the flawless pacing. The way he always gives you enough time to reasonably react to his attacks, while also being just fast enough that you can never truly feel safe, keeps me so perfectly engaged from start to finish. It feels like he's just slow enough to the point that he isn't overly demanding for what Dark Souls 1's movement allows the player to do. As for the moveset, it mostly consists of differing melee attacks. There's a solid handful that aren't the most complex, but still feel satisfying, such as a few single swings, triple combos, and the one where he jumps in the air and slams back down, which is easily the best version of that type of attack in this game. But there are also quite a few that add some layered dynamics to the fight. There's this one where he does a big leap forward, which requires some good positioning from the player since the attack's hitbox lasts a little longer than your iframe dodge, meaning you can't start your dodge the moment he begins the attack. There's also this one which comes with unexpectedly long range, and the cheeky little swipe where he pretends he's not doing anything and tries to grab you from behind. Halfway through the fight, he also gains 3 different dark spells. One which is like a giant shotgun blast of dark magic, another where he makes it rain down on you, and the third one where he makes the projectiles zoom in from the sides of the arena, meaning you need to stand close to him. And aside from the awesome gameplay, he's also just a really damn cool encounter. In terms of story build-up and sheer power, he's easily one of the most hyped up beings in the series. I mean, he's literally the combatant that the great knight Artorias was never able to beat. Plus his arena and intro cutscene are super atmospheric. And come on, just look at how cool this guy is. A lot of the time I feel like monster designs tend to fall into the trope where they just try to gross you out with their deformities, which is still interesting in its own right, but I think Manus genuinely looks awesome. He's got those massive antlers with glowing red spots, that weird ethereal left arm, the giant staff, and the spiked tail. It's so good. Plus the magic attacks obviously look great as well. So without a doubt, fighting Manus is the most fun I get out of Dark Souls 1. But of course, that's just my opinion, so feel free to tell me your thoughts on DS1's bosses in the comments. For those of you who are interested, my next video is going to be the 3rd entry in the Elden Ring area review series. I know it's been way too long since the previous one, but I do still intend to finish that series. Anyway, that's all I got for now. See ya.